Should we try and get a couple more in before news at 3:30?
Yeah, I mean, we'd certainly talk about Jimmy's Hall, which is directed by Ken Loach, written by Paul Laverty, one of his regular collaborators. And this is based on the true story of Jimmy Gralton, so a guy in 1920s rural Ireland who built a social club, like a dance hall for locals to gather in and meet and party. And very popular place. Locals love it. But almost it becomes too successful because the church start noticing it and the politicians notice it, and they don't like the idea of all these kind of villagers and all these locals getting together. They think that it's a place that can kind of breed anarchy and communism. And of course it's set slap bang in the middle of some very complex times in Ireland. So the aftermath of the Anglo-Irish War and the start of the Great Depression, lots of issues in this about land ownership, and the church is trying to wield its influence over so much of daily life. So Jimmy, the guy who set up this all, finds himself right at the centre of this perfect storm, really, of paranoia. Here's a clip from Jimmy's Hall.
So, if it's your money and your land, does that mean that it's your hall?
No. It's built by the voluntary labour of the community and it's run by an elected committee. I'll teach art, and Molly and Una will teach the music, and Mossy the boxing, gymnastics, woodwork, literature, and every penny will go back into the hall to buy materials, musical instruments, books.
And we'll have the best damn dances in the whole country.
I just spoke to your parish priest, not best pleased. He even said that all the horses that drag the sand here will die within a year.
Is he a priest or a witch doctor?
Our opposition is still the same, the masters and the pastors.
So this is apparently Ken Loach's final big movie. There may be documentaries and smaller projects, but it's certainly billed as a final of sorts. And the usual fire in the politics is very much on display. I mean, we've seen that in lots of other Ken Loach films, but I think the difference here is it does feel, maybe it's because I know it's his last film, but it certainly felt to me more like the work of an older director, an experienced director, just kind of saying goodbye a little bit, because it's got a more of a gentle disposition than perhaps some of his other films. And it felt like the work of someone who wanted to end on a more optimistic and romantic note rather than a really angry note. I think actually that is sometimes its problem. It does feel a little too romanticised. I mean, the character of Jimmy seems to be a man who can pretty much do anything. I mean, a little more light and shade wouldn't have gone amiss. He's looks great. He's eloquent. He's charming. He's fair. I mean, he's just like the perfectly rounded person. So I think he's possibly a little bit too good in this film. And there's a very rose-tinted view of community and communities rallying together and having these art lessons and reciting poetry and dancing and all this kind of stuff. It does seem very idealistic. It's very clear who are the good people and who are the bad people. There's not really any grey areas. But I think luckily to counteract that, you do get some lovely performances and some very raw performances. And I mean, this is a thing that Ken Loach has done through the years, is use people who aren't hugely familiar faces, not necessarily massive stars, perhaps people who haven't even been in a movie before. So you do get a rawness to it. I mean, Barry Ward is the name of the guy who plays Jimmy, a theatre actor. So even when it does feel a little twee, and it is surprisingly twee, I think, for a Ken Loach movie in parts, there is still that down-to-earth style that we associate from him. It's still there. And, you know, it's good that there is someone out there, albeit in his last movie, but there's someone out there who is fearless, really, and is broaching these political situations, these social situations that aren't particularly sexy or obvious box office hits, but they still have some relevance to things today. And he's very good at sort of picking out these stories that perhaps we don't know too much about and bringing them to a contemporary audience and saying, you know what, this is still really important and this is still really interesting. So perhaps it's a little too pretty as a final statement, but it's still very enjoyable. And, you know, I guess it's nice for him to kind of go out with a smile, actually, and to go out and say, you know, I love movies and I love movie making and I just want people to have a great time.
I think he was almost doing that with the last one, with Angel Share.
Yeah, you could see it a bit there as well, couldn't you?
You know, I mean, the relationship he's had with Paul Laverty, writer, is kind of... I mean, I loved Angel Share. If you haven't seen it, you should definitely go and check out.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely a fun Ken Loach, you know, whereas there are, you know, hidden agenda and things like that are a lot darker. But, I mean, you know, Kes was fun. I mean, but I think Kes just had a bit more of... which was obviously a big breakthrough. Had a bit more of an edge to it than this. But I certainly didn't dislike it. perhaps just a little twee in parts, but on the whole, very good spirited.